So just to welcome you. We're really excited to have you to be part of today's discussion. Our aim in today's webinar is really to explore key challenges and opportunities shaping the philanthropy landscape in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we're drawing on insights from the 2025 Global Philanthropy Environment Index. And in today's webinar, we're going to be hearing from regional experts, country researchers from Senegal, Ethiopia, and South Africa, who drew up various country reports, as well as ecosystem actors working across the Sub-Saharan Africa region. They'll be sharing their perspectives and key findings and share their thoughts and experiences on the philanthropy environment. So at this moment, I'd like to invite Dr. Dana Dawn, who's the director of the Global Philanthropy Indices at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, to just introduce us to the Global Philanthropy Environment Index, what it is about, and to just maybe share a couple of trends that we're seeing at the global level following the 2025 analysis. Donna, I'm going to hand over to you to just take us through and introduce us to the index, to just help us have just a global understanding of what the philanthropy environment is like before we delve into looking at Sub-Saharan Africa.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. Yes, good afternoon, or for those of you in different time zones, good morning and good evening. It's wonderful to be here and to be able to tell you a little bit about the Global Philanthropy Environment Index. The GPI is one of two global philanthropy indices that's coordinated by the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where I work. And its purpose is to help provide evidence and understanding about trends in giving and factors influencing those trends. The GPI is a collaborative effort. It's made possible because of contributions from over 170 country, regional, and global philanthropy experts. It's the world's most comprehensive effort to map the global philanthropy landscape. Our latest edition, the 2025 GPI, includes a global report, 15 regional reports, and 95 country or economy reports. These reports help to reveal incentives and barriers to a more enabling philanthropy environment. They also help us to see how philanthropy has evolved and is likely to evolve over time. The GPI looks at 6 factors that are believed to influence philanthropy environments based on past research. These factors include the ease of operating a philanthropy organization, fiscal incentives for making or receiving donations, the ability to send and receive cross-border donations, as well as the political, economic, and sociocultural environments in these countries. So we ask our country experts to provide a score between 1 and 5, with 5 being the most highly favorable environment and a score of 1 indicating a very unfavorable environment or restrictive environment. The scores are then accompanied by a short narrative that details relevant developments such as changes in laws or regulations, implementation factors, or infrastructure. So with that brief background, there's much more to say about the methodology, but I wanted to just provide a brief background and then share a little bit about the global highlights before we can delve into the regional and country level. So I can start by showing you this global map. On this world map, the countries that are included in the 2025 GPI are identified in some shade of green. So the darker shades indicate it's a bit more favorable environment, and the lighter shades indicate a more restrictive environment. And the countries that you see in gray have not yet been included in the GPI. So of the 54 countries on the African continent, we currently have 14 included in the GPI, the latest, so just about a quarter. That includes 11 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and 3 in North Africa. This bar chart that I'm showing now depicts the number of countries that fall onto the various score ranges. So of the 95 countries in our latest report, 61% report favorable environments, which means that they've scored on average across all the 6 factors a 3.5 or higher. And the remaining 39% are reporting about a restrictive environment. We did, some comparisons across regions. So we had 15 regions included in the latest version, and 10 of the 15 regions reported favorable philanthropic environments. Here, kind of notified in the red, is Sub-Saharan Africa. So that's listed as the average scores for the region as being below the favorable kind of marker of 3.5. Latin America is reported with the most challenging environment, driven largely by political and economic challenges in that region. In this chart, we are looking at the 6 factors just overall for the whole, all 95 countries. And you can see that ease of operating a philanthropy organization received the highest score of all the factors, with reporting, clear or improving policies and procedures for registering or operating or dissolving an organization. This was followed by higher scores for the sociocultural factor as well. The average score for cross-border philanthropic flows was the lowest for all of the factors, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We were able to, because we've done this research for three times so far. We did it we published in 2018, 2022, and 2025 on the philanthropy environments covering 3 years of each of those time periods, and we see overall relative stability. But there are some changes. We've seen some economies decline and some economies improve. But when we look at the factors over this time period, we see that ease of operating has been gradually improving along with political environments are trending upwards. But we're seeing cross-border philanthropic flows kind of trending down over these 3 periods. So this trend downwards in cross-border giving is attributed primarily to 2 causes. The first is that experts are reporting that new policies or practices that are really about preventing money laundering or stopping the flow of funding for terrorism are also having perhaps an unintended effect on people trying to make donations. And secondly, we're seeing an increasing number of countries reporting that governments are seeking to reduce foreign influence in their country. So they're either prohibiting or putting some restrictions or kind of tracking more carefully with more paperwork funds coming into the country, which makes it a little bit more difficult to make transfers. And the last kind of data point that I'm going to share with you in this presentation is just, the report includes, we look at emerging trends, we look at lasting trends since COVID, and we have a spotlight section on climate philanthropy, but I'm just sharing with you here some of the lasting trends that people reported in the report since COVID. And one of the interesting points was that, over 70% of the country reports talked about increasing collaborations among philanthropy organizations. And also that they've remained kind of using the virtual or hybrid workspaces. So there's much more data in the reports. If you want to check out the reports, you can access them. They're all freely available, the 2025, 2022, and 2018 on our website, which I'll put in the chat afterwards. But I want to, before I close, just briefly thank all of the contributors to the 2020 GPI. It wouldn't be possible without these experts. And in particular, the 12 country experts from Sub-Saharan Africa, many of whom are on this call today. Some of them have asked to remain anonymous. And also a special thanks to our regional reviewer for Sub-Saharan Africa, who also happens to be our next speaker. So Dr. Tendai Marisa, the director of SIVIO Institute, I'd like to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dana. And just a word of correction, I didn't do the Middle East, I did Sub-Saharan Africa. On Dana's last slide, it says reviewer for Middle East and North Africa. Talking about Sub-Saharan Africa, something that has been historical, that has helped Africa, that we call global philanthropy in Africa. This is philanthropy that is done by international foundations that are outside of Africa, but pouring money into Africa for various causes. Then there's the philanthropy, there's the African philanthropy. This is the philanthropy that is emerging, spurred on by, number one, the growth of high net worth giving, the growth of corporate giving, the growth of individual giving, and also a recognition of certain cultural practices that we had sort of not amplified in our discussions of what philanthropy is. So those are sort of the trends that we have. So I think I'll spend more time looking at how African philanthropy has grown and how it is affected by the operating environment. So there's this growing recognition that it is a distinct sector. As African philanthropy, we've got a core of high net worth individuals who set up foundations. And the majority of these people who are setting up foundations are billionaires. But alongside that, there's also a growth of what you may call intermediary institutions. These are largely organizations that are able to harness resources from either the global north and other regions, and even within Africa, and are able then to parcel out those in a smaller grants to different organizations, especially those that are at the local level. So what we're seeing then is a bigger ecosystem that we're trying to understand as a coherent whole. So others will find them analyzing the philanthropy of global foundations, others studying what Africans are doing amongst themselves, then others trying to understand what individuals are doing in terms of individual giving, and others just looking at community practices. So that's what we're looking at, saying, how are all these practices affected by the operating environment? So just for those who are yet to interact with forms of giving in Sub-Saharan Africa, what we find in communities is usually around these four, but they speak to different ways in which communities have sort of owned giving. That we're reviewing for this report was characterized by sort of the return of inflation, and in some instances, it eroded the value of high net worth individuals in Africa. Some shed off. I remember the billionaire based in Zimbabwe at some point lost billionaire status because of inflation and many other challenges that were happening across sort of the globe. And this is COVID inspired and many other challenges. Then also the Financial Action Task Force, its measures around the black and gray listing is sort of given leeway to governments to come up with very difficult measures around the movement of money under the guise of trying to sort of rein in on potential for money laundering or financing terror. But we've seen that many governments have jumped onto this window and begun to come up with new legislation that is unfortunately affecting the movement of money from one region to the other. The South African Central Bank issued a new circular. They are checking almost every with a deposit from outside into a South African account. That also is beginning to affect, because now everyone who's sending money, there's quite a number of documentation, especially when the money is recorded as a gift. There's a form that those who are sending money have to complete, etc. So it's no longer just as automatic as pressing a button to say you have sent your money as a philanthropy organization based in San Francisco to an organization in South Africa. Those gifts are under closer scrutiny because South Africa is trying to deal with its own issues to do with gray listing. So as a reminder, when we're looking at scores, anything between 1 and 3.4 is what we call less favorable conditions. Then the more favorable will be up from 3.5 all the way to 5. So this is very important for us to look at the trends as we're looking at the various sort of trackings that we have done. So the regional average, so you look at all these categories. My colleague has already spoken to the categories that we look at when we're doing this scoring. But we believe that these countries provide us with a sort of an understanding of the picture around Africa in terms of where we are. So you see that on average, Africa is still on the, I would say, still less than the what we call the favorable. It's still below the favorable at the moment. Most of the countries are scoring less than 3.5, and even our regional average is 3.18. So there have been countries, if you look at challenges in Sudan, that's a challenge. Then you're looking at even challenges in Zimbabwe, etc. But the majority of the countries that we evaluated, except for Senegal, you have a less than favorable score. Senegal and South Africa. South Africa is borderline 3.56. So it's those tensions I was mentioning to say we are seeing not a huge leap in terms of improvement. We're seeing either a decline in the environment or a stagnation of sorts. So I'll try to go into some emerging issues. So these are the changes by country over the years. For those who've been tracking the Global Philanthropy Environment Index, you will notice that there's the 2018 report, the 2022, and this one that we are discussing today. So if you look, has there been improvement slightly? Senegal doing very well. And also, there will be some contestations around Ethiopia, but these are the data that we got from the reviewer. And I also, as the regional reviewer, also checked them out. I'm sort of happy with the 3.54. South Africa is remaining at 3.56. So here we're just trying to look at change by factor, looking at socio-cultural environment. This is the best change that we have seen. So I think this speaks to the fact that when we're talking about philanthropy, for most of us here in Africa, we root philanthropy within our cultures. So if you look at how we're looking at it now to say, look, the recognition of culture is very helpful. And also the more we talk about it, the environment also improves from a cultural perspective. But the ease of operation, in some countries on an average, yes, it has improved from 3.29 to 3.75, 3.74, sorry. But still, this is one of the major issues, because when we talk about ease of operation, we're talking about how banks treat your money, how the sort of the tax authorities deal with you, etc. So this is an area that ideally a healthier philanthropy environment should be scoring 4 or above. And so the challenge to do with the broader macroeconomic environment, where when philanthropy resources are being released from source, they're in a certain currency, and there's the desire to say that when they land to the recipient, they should be in that currency. This could be the British pound, this could be the US dollar, but in many instances, many banks and many policies, these resources are diluted. And for those who have worked in Africa, you know how unstable some of our currencies are.
Okay, I will take this moment and just try to. We have some people in different parts of Sub-Saharan Africa that can perhaps their internet connection might be working better. So I'd like to introduce Kitty Yassin. She is the country expert for Ethiopia, but she's based right now in Canada. Oh no, sorry, in Washington State.
Hi, thank you so much, Dana, and hello, everyone. So lovely to be here. Yeah, I'll be sharing some key findings from the 2025 JPEI Index for Ethiopia and highlight some important developments shaping the sector since the first report in 2023. Yes, so I will be sharing some findings, some highlights from the 2025 report for Ethiopia. So as you can see on this chart, Ethiopia's overall score in 2025 is 3.5, which is slightly down from 3.62 in 2022. So this reflects a mixed environment. The legal framework and the socio-cultural foundation remain strong, but the political instability, especially since 2020, has weakened the day-to-day operating condition. So the most notable declines are on the ease of operating from 3.87 to 3.33, and also the political environment from 3.90 to 3.15. At the same time, the cross-border flow increased from 3.60 to 4.1, and the social-cultural environment improved from 4 to 4.3. So the story is not, the legal regression, but it is more of a contextual strain. So the 2019 CSO proclamation remains enabling legal environment for Ethiopia, especially since the 2009 CSO proclamation, which was very restrictive, especially in terms of nonprofits accessing international funding. The 2019 CSO proclamation lifted that restriction, and nonprofits are able to raise funds unlimitedly from the international sources. However, as I said earlier, the political instability, especially in the regions of Tigray, Oromia, Amhara, and other parts, has affected the implementation of that enabling proclamation or law. So now, for example, registration takes more than 90 days, which was not expected, or the 2019 law was, trying to reduce that time it takes for nonprofits to register. And also the approval outcome are now less predictable because of some leadership transition at the Agency for Civil Society Organization, which is the governing entity for nonprofits or CSO in Ethiopia. So there has also introduced some administrative uncertainty. There are some scrutiny and security concerns that affect the mobility and coordination among these organizations. So this explains the decline in both ease of operation and political environment scores. The other finding is, Ethiopia's strong category in 2025 is the cross-border philanthropy flow, which is, as I said, increased to 4.1. So the legal environment allows unlimited foreign funding and foreign grants, excuse me, foreign grants are treated favorably. The Ethiopian diaspora also plays a critical role here, supporting education, health, humanitarian relief. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that. So the Ethiopian diaspora, as I said, played a critical role supporting education, healthcare, humanitarian relief, and infrastructure projects through remittances, in-kind support, and also skill transfer. However, over 90% of the CSO funding still comes from the international sources, foundation, and etc. These can create, structural vulnerability when, political instability affects the operational access or donor confidence in funding flow, which can slow down. The highest score in is still the social-cultural environment, which is 4.3. So Ethiopia has long-standing mutual aid institutions that really is an evidence for a strong social fabric. For example, IDIR, which is, the bureau services and, community service that, people come together in times of bereavement and grieving. ICO, which is, the saving institution that gives some financial support among members. Maheber and also other members or membership programs function as informal social protection system. These traditions reflect a deep collectivist culture. However, interestingly, the political instability has also tightened this community-based solidarity, which is ironic, Also, the diaspora mobilization, digital giving, and emergency reliefs for displaced population during this political instability have increased. And that is the reason why the social-cultural environment has increased in the score for the 2025 report. So just to summarize, Ethiopia has, still an enabling legal framework in terms of law. Nothing has changed since 2023. However, the political instability constrained the day-to-day activity and the implementation of those laws. However, we have also seen a resilient social-cultural foundation, and also the cross-border giving has increased. In my view, what political priorities should focus on is first improving the regulatory prediction by making that law implementation as favorable as possible. In addition to that favorable law, and we need to work more on the implementation side as well. And also, building some domestic funding capacity to reduce, over reliance on international funding. So what I want to give for you as key point or key takeaways that, in short, like if I summarize the philanthropic landscape in Ethiopia, I would say it is legally enabling, but politically constrained with, strong social fabric. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Kitty. Wonderful, very insightful presentation. Now we'll turn it over to our colleague in South Africa, Ricardo.
Hi, good day, everybody. So I'm going to focus on South Africa, and I'm just going to share my screen, but the intention is just to demonstrate the key issues highlighted in our report, as was mentioned by. Can you see my screen? So
yes, we see it.
Excellent. So as mentioned by Dr. Tendai, South Africa is sort of borderline. The overall score is 3.56. Now, this was a very interesting period for South Africa because we got grey listed by FATF early 2023 in February. And in the run-up to the grey listing, new laws were actually introduced. Interestingly enough, the laws were introduced in a rapid time frame. In fact, some were saying it's the quickest laws that laws have been through Parliament since South Africa has been a democracy. So that was quite significant, very important in terms of the focus of the laws. In that there were two key focus areas. The one was on non-profit organizations, and the other one was on beneficial ownership. Both issues affected non-profit organizations. So the laws were actually proposed or went through the parliamentary process prior to our grey listing in an attempt to avoid grey listing. So even though it wasn't so much focused on philanthropy, the issue of compliance and increased burdens on non-profit organizations was center point at the time. And just to say that it was quite controversial because one of the recommendations was that there should be a compulsory registration for all non-profit organizations operating in South Africa. So the focus has been on compliance in South Africa, and ultimately the laws were changed to introduce compulsory registration for organizations carrying on activities outside of South Africa and also providing funds to others outside of South Africa. And another interesting development, and again, Dr. Tendai referred to that, is Section 31 of the Financial Intelligence Center Act, which was, it was part of the legislation, but not in operation. And during this period, it came into operation. And effectively, the requirement was that, if fund, I think the amount is just over $1,000, if that kind of money is coming into South Africa or going out of South Africa, then there's an obligation on the banking institutions to report the funding or that flow of funding to the Financial Intelligence Center. So that component has also been relevant in the context of cross-border philanthropy. We haven't yet seen the full impact of that, but definitely it emanated during the reporting period. So fortunately, South Africa has since been off the grey list, but in total, we've been there for 32 months. And irreversible changes have been introduced affecting non-profit organizations in particular. The second theme that I wanted to raise was this sort of different scores in relation to the economic environment and the philanthropic environment. And I guess we can put the blame on the concept of Ubuntu. So really the inherent cultural practices in terms of philanthropy, which is not unique to South Africa, also evident in other countries and described in different ways. But in essence, research has indicated that even though the unemployment rate in South Africa is significantly high, officially the rate is just at the time about 32% of the population, but in reality, the broader definition of the unemployment rate actually means it's 40%, about 10% more than the official rate. So that's significant. But despite that, the culture of philanthropy remains strong in South Africa. And so that is quite an important feature. The last point that I wanted to highlight was the stability of the legal framework. Generally, even though there's been amendments that have been introduced in the South African legal context, the framework itself is still stable. in terms of the processing, that there's been increases as well, because there's been an online system that has been introduced. But that has also meant that there's been quite a compliance burden on especially smaller organizations. So with this increased focus on organizations, the focus has been on deregistration, and it was estimated that about 50% of the organizations on the register of the NPO Directorate are non-compliant. And even though that process has been suspended for close to a decade, the deregistration process, when South Africa got grey listed, there was now more intense focus in enforcing the legislation, and also to embark on the process of deregistering non-compliant organizations. My own suspicion was that a lot of those organizations would have been dormant. However, it became abundantly clear in the meantime that there are some organizations that have simply not submitted their reports, or some organizations that are in operation still, but have also been deregistered for essentially failure to submit their reports. And so, in summary, as indicated, South Africa is borderline, and my understanding is that even though this the report occurred during a very significant time in the South Africa's non-profit sector's development, the implications of the changes that were introduced will still be unfolding in the next couple of months and years. So it would be interesting to see to what extent the score in the South African context may change. Hopefully it would go higher. But yeah, there are talks of what was mentioned already in terms of unintended consequences. And just as a side note, a more recent report that was released specifically focused on the unintended consequences. So thank you so much. That is the South African contribution.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. That was very helpful. So now we'd like to introduce Rukutu Kediso, who is our country expert from Senegal. And please, Rukutu.
Thank you so much, Anna. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be part of this convening, and for having served as a country expert for 2 years now. So for Senegal, the major development, first, I don't have slides, so we have no drawing, but I hope that everyone will catch what I will be presenting though. So let's move forward. So for Senegal, the major development, I would say first, it would be like a stable and favorable legal framework, because Senegal has remained constantly high scored in this one, operating philanthropy, in terms of operating philanthropic organizations, keeping the score 4.67. And I just saw that on the presentation of Dr. Marisa, that it was the highest score for all the countries in the Sub-Saharan continent. So it is very, very easy in Senegal to open an organization, philanthropic organization, NGO, association, etc., etc. There is also an improvement in the economic environment. So there is a rising from 3.5 score in 2022 to 4 in 2025, partly reflecting post-pandemic stabilization efforts and the better fiscal management. Also, there is a political environment that remained stable and solid during that period, of course, maintaining a score of 4, and despite some national political debates, but that did not really fundamentally disrupt the enabling environment for the philanthropy during that period. So I'm very insisting in that period, because things have radically changed in between there and now. So the legal reforms and administrative trends in Senegal, Senegal continues to have like refining its NGO regulations with an interministerial committee meeting that is now set up between the ministries, different ministries, to ease the process of registering a philanthropic organization, an association, or an NGO. And every 2 months, they need to examine the NGO registration, which improves approval timelines and transparency. Also, we have to note that the registration of foundation, it remains really, really lengthy. It can now, in practice, it can exceed 1 year. But in overall, regulatory framework really remains stable and predictable, supporting philanthropy activity. We also have some changes in terms of cross-border giving, actually some challenges, because the Senegal has declined in terms of cross-border giving, from scoring from 2.95 in actually scoring now 2.95 in 2025 compared to 3.25 in 2022. So this reflects the global trend of reducing cross-border spaces during risking compliance requirements. And it is also due to the tightening of anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financial laws. We also have some major strengths in terms of social-cultural environment, which actually, for Senegal, we remained a perfect score, 5 in social-cultural environment and support for philanthropy, which is reflecting the fact that giving is rooted in strong tradition and religious giving, mutual aid, etc. in Senegal. We also have some emerging trends at the national level. So at the national level, we do have some, we see the Islamic and faith-based philanthropy growing rapidly, and the digital giving and crowdfunding that is expanding, and the corporate foundations and CSRs that are becoming more prominent. But also, finally, we see an improvement of youth philanthropy and activism. At the regional level, we see the rise of philanthropic networks, but even at the national level, in Senegal, we already have now in between the creation, since 2024, the creation of the REFES, which is the Réseau Philanthropique du Sénégal, which is the first philanthropic network of Senegal. It's also the same in Côte d'Ivoire, with PAPSI, Plateforme des Acteurs Philanthropiques de la Côte d'Ivoire. And at the regional level, we are still at the institutionalization stage of the West African Philanthropy Network, which needs to also get out of the dark and start doing some activities also. We see at the regional level, the professionalization of youth philanthropy, enhanced by some platforms such as the Africa Youth Philanthropy Network that is registered in Ghana, and other organizations demonstrating that youth are no longer just recipients of philanthropy, but key actors of shaping rooms. Also, there is an increase in interest in data, standards, and governance. So now we are speaking more and more about research. We see that the ecosystem is maturing in terms of research and data knowledge building, so which aligns very well with the continental movements and at the global level as well. And we see new collaborations between governance, philanthropy, and business. And we see the reflection of having philanthropy as the 4th P, as a vehicle for development. Those discussions have started. And finally, we also see the reflection further on alternative funding, domestic resource mobilization, due to the global shift in terms of funding. And in practice, we also see a great collaboration that is showcased with the organization of the very first philanthropy impact event that will happen this year in Togo. That was from a collaboration between some organization in Cote d'Ivoire and Togo. So those are some major shifts in the region. And finally, I would say that Senegal's philanthropy environment continues to evolve. It balances tradition and modern philanthropic practices, and the data confirms its strengths. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of updating the 1995 law in terms of philanthropy, actually in terms of NGO, which has some component on philanthropy. We need new reforms and new laws that are specifically dedicated to philanthropy, and its shades, whether it is religious or institutional or grassroots philanthropy, etc., etc. So there are so major changes, but I will be happy to continue sharing more during the discussions and question responses.
All right, I think I'm back. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay, you look like you can hear me. All right, thank you so much, Rogetu. And yeah, we will just try to move on. I think we lost a bit of time. We'll move on to a colleague and a friend, Professor Beggy. He's going to moderate a panel actually with practitioners. We just reverse roles here. I'm more of a practitioner, he's the academic, but it's okay. Then we will, after this, we will have a question and answer session where we then sort of invite everyone either to discuss the country reports or what practitioners are raising, after the moderated session that Professor Moyo is going to lead. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much. I hope colleagues can hear me. Let me take this opportunity to thank SIVIO, the Lilly School, and colleagues at CAPSI for putting this together. I'm really excited to invite Omi Tade, popularly known as Tade Aina, to most of us, an experienced practitioner, activist, but also scholar on issues that have to do with philanthropies, development, and over time has spent a lot of his work supporting most of these institutions in the continent, and now focusing on higher education at Carnegie Corporation of New York. So welcome, Prof. Aina. We're also joined by Evans Okinyi. Evans is with the East Africa Philanthropy Network, one of the institutions in the region in Africa that sits so well put in the ecosystems, putting together a number of members from the East Africa region, championing the debate on the growth and direction of philanthropy. So again, welcome to Evans. And finally, Jackie Asimwe, who is with SIVSOS. And some of you might have seen Jackie doing walks. She recently surpassed 500 walks. And it's something that has really drawn our attention as scholars. We are now studying those 500 walks to see what they mean for philanthropy. But Jackie has done more than walking. She has a book called Facing the Mountain, where she details her work in philanthropy. And recently, Jackie and team are working with the University of Makerere to try and set up a center on philanthropy in East Africa. So I'm really excited to have these colleagues join us. So maybe let me start with you, Okatade, and just ask maybe two questions. We are just given about 15 minutes to try and wrap this so that we can have a discussion. Maybe listening to the presentations, both from the global landscape as well as the Sub-Saharan countries, maybe what are your key takeaways? But secondly, how do you see this GPI data helping us to address critical challenges and issues that we face in Sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to philanthropy? So let me give you about 5 minutes, Oga, to respond to that.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, the School of Philanthropy. I actually was really struck by the emphasis on the decline in cross-border giving. And what struck me there, what I was trying to really get a handle on was that, are we talking of cross-border philanthropy within the continent, or are we talking about cross-border philanthropy that's related to diaspora philanthropy? That was the first thing that struck me here. And if we were talking about cross-border philanthropy within the continent, I think there will be significant underreporting. Significant underreporting because not all transfers are recorded. Even when you talk about money transfers, people carry things across the border by themselves. I have seen cases where buses going to Busia I've heard from Nairobi, people have put money, given money to people to deliver for them, to deliver either to community groups or to parents and all. So I think we need to really think about how do we really get that kind of evidence? Where does that data come from? Are we really on top of that data, given the nature of relationships on the continent? Particularly the person to person, the communal to communal. I don't want to use the word informality. I think that is a denigratory term. So that's it. So I don't think and then the other thing, when we talk about cross-border philanthropy and we're looking at north-south transfers of resources, in 2025, are we actually including the breakdown in the resources being transferred by international philanthropies or global not philanthropies? So that's all. Is this really, are we capturing only Africa to Africa or African transfer of resources here? So that's one. The second one that got me was the importance, and I think there's a great moment going on here. There's a lot of debate around taxation, on taxation reforms on the continent. There is a resistance, popular resistance, because at times, you want to say no taxation without representation, no taxation without inclusion, no taxation without participation, no taxation without delivery. But philanthropy, particularly when we begin to formalize philanthropy or think of philanthropy in the sense of the Global North institutional setup and frameworks, has a close relationship with taxation. Taxation as an enabler, taxation as a facilitator. And that's something we have to really advocate for. So when we get into advocacy, it's a very, very important element there. Then the third one, and that came out in the Ethiopian report, and I think it might even have applied to Senegal without Senegal being sufficiently sensitive to it. And that's the political environment. And this is where it's not just national political environment, even cross-border political environment. If you look at what's going on in the Sahel, and you look at the countries tightening up the flows of financial resources, the mobility of persons, it's because of a new emerging role, stronger role of non-state actors and malign non-state actors that are destabilizing this country. Some of them are jihadists, some of them are just bandits and militia. If you look at, northwestern Nigeria, northeastern Nigeria, you look at parts of Kenya, northeastern Kenya, you look at parts of Mozambique, you look at, of course, what's going on in DRC. The instability on the continent is both a disincentive and a source of imagination and innovation in philanthropic giving. Because when you have breakdowns and when you have conflicts, Africans are imaginative. Africans are resilient. Before the great humanitarian groups come, Africans are already contributing to taking care of themselves. I think the most significant humanitarian intervention on the continent in the areas of crisis and conflicts are the works of African communities, African groups, African faith-based organizations. So these are the observations I have about this. My question is, what is behind the scoring? And the final one, very quickly, is what has been termed, I don't know whether it's not a misnomer, philanthropic effectiveness on the ground. I would like to say the impact of philanthropy on the real lives of communities and people. How are we capturing this? Again, at times, the environment, the so-called philanthropic environment, does not really capture effectiveness, because effectiveness is how many people's lives are saved concretely by interventions by groups, both formal and informal philanthropic groups, and philanthropy given by Ubuntu groups, by mutual aid groups. So it's an interesting challenge for me, and I can see that my brother Evans is here. I will leave the conversation around the roles that networks can play in developing the infrastructure, in helping us to deal with the advocacy and the policy changes that are necessary. But I don't think policy changes are enough. I don't think policy changes are enough. I think the actions of concrete actors become more significant in this. So these are my takeaway. But I think it's a great report. I think it's a beginning. I think we need to track the development of philanthropies. We need to track philanthropic footprints on the continent, and of course, philanthropic impact. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you so much, Oga. I will come back to you to get your thoughts on the next edition, the 2026 edition, as we begin to land. But let me move to Evans, and Evans, ask you the same question around what was most surprising and your takeaways from the presentations, and also how you see this report helping you as one of the actors and networks in the region to address some of the critical challenges that philanthropic institutions or the sector faces in general.
A lot has been said by my brother Tade, and I don't want to take a lot of time repeating the same, but I feel there's one more thing that really struck me in the report. And for me, the most striking thing is the Sub-Saharan Africa data that really shows that there's a distance between how ready people are to give and how poorly equipped our systems are to channel that giving. If you look at the score on the sociocultural component, we see an improvement from, I think, 3.33 to 3.75. Across this region, people are giving more. People are giving deliberately through faith communities, through Harambee contributions, the diaspora, remittances, family foundations, whether they're operating outside the region or inside the region, and other formal structures. If you look at the data from EPIC Africa in 2024, they're pointing us to something very interesting, that 65% of African nonprofits are now receiving individual donations from Africans within and outside the continent. That willingness, Prof, is accelerating day by day, yet the region's overall score sits at below the global average, currently at 3.31. So this points to regulatory framework, the tax systems, the intermediary institutions that my brother Tade was referring to, that should be matching that generosity with the infrastructure that has fallen behind. Kenya illustrates this perfectly. According to the World Giving Index, I think for the last 2 years, Kenya has been ranked as the most generous country in Africa. More than half of Kenyans donate to charities. Yet, if you look at our overall GPI score, we slid from 3.5 to 3.47. And this tips from barely favorable to barely restricted, not because of the culture of giving as wicked, no, but it is because of the economic stresses and the operational constraints, which I feel has outpaced the genuine progress the country is making on the tax reforms. So the surprise is not the gap that is existing, but I see it every day. The surprise for me is how precisely the index identifies it. For me, the takeaways, I would put them into three. I think first is, if you look at the data that we are seeing from the Sub-Saharan Africa, we've made real gain in terms of the ease of operation. We've made gain in terms of the socio-cultural environment. But we are stuck as a region around cross-border giving, the flows, but also in terms of the economic environment, which is seriously under pressure. But also to mention the tax incentives and its specific utilization, which is remaining as a gap. But if you go now to what I would say as takeaways, we see a region where governments are willing to engage. And that's why you see that improvement in terms of that specific component. But there's also a policy window. If you leverage the willingness of the governments to engage, we have a policy window that we can actually work with. For me, that is a takeaway for institutions and infrastructure support entities like EAPN. The second thing for me is the tax incentive picture, which is more complex than a single score can suggest. If you look at the case of Kenya, which I know best, the incentives really, the score, when you look at the tax incentives, jumped from, I think, 3 to 4.5. And of course, this is driven by the regulations which were adopted by the government. That is a real legislative progress. But the overall score fell because the economic environment declined, the operational context tightened. So the lesson is that tax reform alone does not move the needle if other factors are deteriorating at the same time. And across much of the region, the challenge remains basic, whether the sector even knows that those incentives exist. Legislations, Prof, without literacy remains a pattern in most of the countries, specifically where I work in East Africa. And so the takeaway for me is, how do we sensitize? How do we bring literacy around what is existing as opportunities, specifically around incentives, and convert that to really grow the philanthropic space that we want to see? And I think for a network, to your last question, for a network like EAPN and a lot of other infrastructure support entities that we are working with, we have a lot that we need to do. One around the legislative, the tax and legislative environment. I think secondly, in terms of how do we make use of such kinds of data as tools to then engage the necessary relevant institutions to grow the field of philanthropy. And I think also for practitioners, how do I put it? How do we stop operating in isolation? I was excited by the data when you looked at the collaboration part, and the continent of Africa was leading in terms of how we welcome the aspect of collaboration as compared to the other regions that the index looked into. So how do we stop operating in isolation? How do we become productive in the work that we do and really leverage the same, specifically the networks, to solve that crisis that is being pointed out by the research, to move knowledge between countries, to connect actors who would not otherwise meet, and to create that coordination that fragments the sector, that coordination that the fragmented sector has really needs, you know? So I think, Prof, those are some of the things that we can put on the table at the moment. But I really want to say that I'm excited and really waiting for the 2025, 2026 report, because it is interesting times that we live in. And I really I'm really waiting for that report to come. Prof, back to you.
Thank you so much. At some point when you said the US taken by surprise by the gap, I thought you were going to say there's a huge gap between how North America, Europe, and others seem to be doing so well, and Sub-Saharan it seems to be doing badly. But I'm also looking forward to the next report, because I think if this report was done this year, I definitely think the US, for example, would not score that highly
Absolutely.
in terms of doing is for philanthropy and all of that, especially from what we have seen over the last year or so.
Yeah.
So there's something also to think about in terms of what we are measuring, how we are measuring it, so that we can equalize some of the narratives in the report. I am certain that if we are to do that report now,
Yeah.
the picture might look a bit different. But let's move on to Jackie. Jackie, same questions around maybe your key takeaways, but I'm also keen to hear your reflection as you are thinking of expanding your work. I mean, I know a bit of what you are planning and some of the areas that you are getting into. So as you are thinking of expanding your work, how do you see data such as this one helping you to address some of those new frontiers for you? I see you as one of the key interpreters of philanthropy in Uganda, but also across the continent now when it comes to philanthropy advisory and other elements of it. So how do you see this kind of data, and maybe even going forward, how the data that will emerge likely to help you expand?
Thank you, Prof, for the question and for all that are listening in. It's interesting times in Uganda, as we all know, but we won't go into that right now. The one thing I wrote here in my notes is we absolutely need data. At the same time, it's not even enough. We are literally scratching the surface of all the ways one can cut this cake, split this atom called philanthropy in Africa. And to Tade's point about impact and footprint, what came to mind even when he spoke was a friend of mine who runs Atta Breast Milk Bank. And what does she do? She mobilizes women to give breast milk to infants that need it. And for me, it's these kinds of things that we're not even beginning to touch, to skim, and yet they are so impactful, so powerful, literally in saving lives of children in Africa. And for me, therefore, I think we also need to find ways, especially because we keep saying that philanthropy is time, treasure, talent. We focus a lot on treasure, of course, because it's, I guess, easier to track. I know that the Charities Aid Foundation tries to track volunteer time and others, other givings in time. But yeah, we need to also innovate around how do we track the untrackable, especially when we talk about philanthropy giving, I mean, African giving and generosity. So that is one. And like I said, there's so much to be so much to be researched. And therefore, that is in fact part of the reason why we are starting an institute such as Ukarimu to contribute also to the research that is happening. When we talk about cross-border giving, I was thinking about, my mind went to the mobile money and how we are using it, especially in East Africa, and how it also is a conduit for and a generator of philanthropic giving in Africa. And remember that I was in a session with you recently, Becky, and I did mention to your class that I wish we could, if we just even studied that, how much does mobile telephony enable in giving? I think our minds would be blown away, and therefore how it can be used, and it is being used for giving across borders, that even defies the restrictions that some governments are putting in place when it comes to cross-border giving. What I believe pondering also is issues around how to speak with banks and tax authorities. When I think about banks in East Africa, two of them have major marathons, several have foundations, so they are in the business of giving. So since they are, and hopefully it wouldn't be alien to them, therefore, how do we, I think we've often done giving separately, right? The non-profit sector and the for-profit, we're like walking on two sides of the same road, literally. So how do we cross that aisle? How do the collaborations that we speak of become collaborations across sectors and across giving? So what is it like to start a concerted campaign, advocacy campaign around speaking to banks and what enablement of philanthropy looks like? Understanding, of course, that they are regulated, but within that, how else can they? Because they come up with all kinds of tools and ways to ease money. So how can we have a conversation with them around that? The other one that I think are our tax bodies. And if any of you cracks that code, please let us know in Uganda. But yeah, we seem to have, unfortunately, across much of Sub-Saharan Africa, inherited a tax system that is extractive, that does not see itself as a contributor of or an enabler of giving, definitely. And so there's a lot of mindset shift that needs to happen. And I know, again, they are controlled, of course, back end by those that require of them to extract tax by whatever means possible. So we're not speaking to them as though we don't understand how they are regulated, but it's to say, what is that long journey that we need to start with tax bodies, one at a time, at regional level, Evans? How do we start that conversation to get to the point where tax is an aid of generosity rather than an impediment? And then finally, Becky, is to say what we're trying to think of also is how do we create, and learning from Wings and from EAPN, how do we create enabling environment groups at country level that are looking at these and tracking these consistently so that the data is also faster to generate for us across time? And lastly, I was interested to look at the gender splits, the dynamics, and I couldn't, unless I didn't see them in my reports. But yeah, I would have been interested to say, what does that data tell us or show us, and where does it point us to?
Jackie, that's a good segue for me to then ask you. I will go in reverse format now to just give us some thoughts on what the next report that would cover the period 2024 and 2025. What are the key issues that you think it should focus on? You have already said the issue of gender is one that is missing.
Absolutely, yes. Let's
What are one-
disaggregate the data.
what are
And
one
like,
other areas?
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was saying, what are the other two or so areas that you think the report should really try and uncover?
What is possible to count beyond the money, I think, is what I'm still looking for. Yeah, so those for me would be two things that I am strongly looking for. And if I can sneak in my we use mobile aim, these things aid us to give. So how can we do we even understand the data just from these things that we hold every day and through which we give multiple times, in fact, right? How can we study how to use that, in fact, to expand philanthropy, having understood the data?
Thank you so much. Let me ask you, Evans, the same question in terms of what are your thoughts around the next edition?
Yeah, so for me, the 2024-26 window will be one of the most defining periods for philanthropy in Sub-Saharan Africa that we've ever seen. A period when, ODA contracting, cross-border flows facing the pressure that they're facing, domestic giving is rising, but poorly captured. If the next report can document all these dynamics simultaneously, I think it will produce the strongest evidence that this region has ever had for making the case for local philanthropy infrastructure. It's specific three things. One, if that report can track the downstream impact of ODA reductions on the philanthropy enabling environment, that will be great. We know the money is falling. We do not yet have systemic data on how that is reshaping the operating conditions for philanthropy organizations on the ground. Are organizations closing? Are they pivoting for domestic funding? Are governments stepping in? Or are they stepping in or stepping back? That story needs to be told with the data. Two, the report, if it can go deeper on tax incentive utilization. If I pick Kenya's case, for example, Kenya's tax incentives cause the jump from 3 to 4.5, but the overall environment declined. That current methodology captures whether incentives exist, but the next edition should assess whether they are known, whether they are accessible to organizations of different sizes. And actually, because of that gap that is existing on paper and in practice, where is the real story for tax incentives in the Sub-Saharan Africa live? The third one for me is for them, which especially Jackie has captured, is to expand the lens to capture informal and community-based giving. I think the index has built a rigorous methodology for measuring the formal environment. We need to extend that rigor to encompass the informal capital that sustains communities. In this region, I think that will be a methodological breakthrough, and it will give policymakers a far more complete picture of how philanthropic resources are already in motion when you look at this part of the continent and globally. Prof.
Thank you so much. And I might want to take this opportunity to plug one of my students. Just be on the lookout for Linda Ochel's work. She just finished working on philanthropy and East Nexus with corruption in Kenya. And one of the issues that she deals with is the issue of taxation. And using various theories. So we are finalizing that, but I'm very certain that in the next months or so, we'll be, having her present some of that work. So I just thought it would be good for you to be on the lookout with your networks as well. So Prof, let me come to you and ask you to put on your hat now as one of the people who have financed this project from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, and what perhaps from where you are sitting and looking at the future of philanthropy and its implications on so many things in the continent, especially Sub-Saharan Africa, what would you stand back and say the next report should really try and help us get our house in order, given the so many challenges and developments that we are facing?
Thank you, Becky. First, on the aside, I have actually been interacting with Linda, so I'm looking forward to her dissertation, her thesis coming up. Becky, you've asked, I think my colleagues, both Jackie and Evans, have stated some of the very interesting things, but there's been an ongoing conversation I've been having with you for almost 2 years now on the dead end to development. And we are beginning to see some of the problems as it's emerging. Evans talked about ODA. For the past 60 years, 70 years, Africa has done nothing but organized, mobilized, and pushed itself around ODA. Yet internal wealth generation that is there, if you look at it, and that's the kind of thing I would like to see. Internal wealth generation, I think, I don't have the figures right on my fingertips now, actually is in multiple of trillions compared to ODA that is coming into Africa. What is the linkage between domestic wealth creation and philanthropic endeavors? What is happening? There are lots of startups going on. Some of them are based on foreign money coming in, but others are actually, there's so much going on now in terms of some of the struggles for the redirection of the economy, of our economies, the new areas of entrepreneurship development. How are these? And I it's funny when you come back to what I'll call the African instinct. These guys are not rapacious just mere rapacious, entrepreneurs, wealth creators. They do get involved in philanthropic giving and philanthropic work. We've not tracked that well enough. And part of it, Becky, is also the over-Westernization of the definition of philanthropy as the giving to others that you not know. If we begin to look at philanthropy, not just in terms of the giving to the other, but as related to reciprocity and mutuality, all those things that we talked about when we looked at the ethnographic development of African philanthropy, we might begin to see other things. Some people will never finish school if that kind of giving does not exist. So some people will never have survived a major health emergency without that. Some roads will not have been built in villages out without that. We give it all kinds of names. So I think it might be very interesting to see what constitutes wealth creation, whatever indicators you want to use. You can go back to formal economics, GDP and all of that. And let's see whether there's a correlation between the growth of internally produced wealth and the perceptions of giving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tate. Thank you so much, Evans. Thank you so much, Jackie, for your inputs. We have run out of time. So I would really want the audience to thank the panelists. And hopefully the conversation does not end here. So I'll hand it back to Tendai, but also to thank everyone really who was listening. I saw some of our students here. And this is really an indication that some of this work that is produced in different institutions actually gets back to be utilized for research and academic purposes. And so just wanted to say that because I see some of our students here and they'll probably discuss some of these findings in class. So back to you, Tendai, and the team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beggy. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Professor Aina, to Evans, and to Jackie. Thank you for those very important insights. Professor Aina, we wrote down your questions, and I can assure you it will take us to write another report to answer them. But very important issues that we really need to be thinking about. But as we're thinking about the index, even the forthcoming report, is to look at this as one of the tools in the ecosystem or in the space in terms of trying to cohere an emerging platform, an emerging space, and to understand, because I believe that outside of this report, there are many other reports that even Prof was beginning to flag around what CAPSI is doing and what others are doing. SIVIO Institute measures the ease of doing philanthropy in Southern Africa, and CAPSI, the CAPSI sort of studies that are coming out from the journal, they help us. But the term that Prof does not want to use, and also I think it will be problematic for many, but the undocumented flaws, those are very necessary, and it's a methodological headache for all of us to say, how do we measure those and actually begin to put them in official records? Because one of the challenges that we've had as Africans is this idea that we felt we always had to push back when we're in global platforms to say, no, Africans actually give, because many colleagues in the West, especially in America, they would look for documentation. So our challenge is actually how do we document this? And that's the role of the centers that we have, CAPSI, and the center that my sister Jackie is going to be opening up. We are in partnership with Makerere University. So we really encourage wider scholarship on this, to use the report as a hook, as an entry point, to help us really develop this as not only as a field of study, but as a critical pillar of sustainable development on the continent.
That was a surprise. Thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion, and thank you to my colleagues and partners, CAPSI and SIVIO team, and to all of our amazing speakers and guests today. Thank you for being here, and please, if you have time to fill out the form and share kind of how the research can do more, and also how should we engage in the future, and wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you very much.